At the Minnesota Capitol, hundreds of pro-Palestinian protesters packed the steps, waving flags, chanting, and at one point kneeling in prayer.
More than 5,000 people have now died on both sides since the terror group Hamas launched a surprise attack on Israeli civilians. As David Schuman shows us, tensions are now high in the Twin Cities.
The crowd at the Capitol Wednesday repeated the chants of the people leading this demonstration for Palestine. From the river to the sea, they shouted.
People need to get better educated on this, and people really need to understand what they're saying.
Some may not know, but Jacob Milner with the American Jewish Committee says that for Jews, the phrase is considered a rhetoric of hate.
But saying from the river to the sea essentially means getting rid of Israel, wiping Israel off the map. And as we've seen in the past few weeks, that really means violence, death to Jews.
Many also may not know that's long been the rallying cry of the terror group Hamas, which controls Palestine.
The vast majority of Palestinians are not Hamas. Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people.
Milner says that distinction is an important one.
That this is not a war against Palestinians. It's a war against Hamas. We want peace for Israelis and Jews and Muslims and Palestinians.
A goal echoed Wednesday by Twin Cities leaders of all faiths.
This is a moment for our nation to lead the world and to lead by an example of calling for peace and, most importantly, in this moment, calling for a ceasefire.
We stand with the grieving families on all sides. Life is precious. All life is precious. Let's bring this to an end. Let's demand that our president call a ceasefire to the benefit of Jews and Muslims.
David Schuman, WCCO News.
Israel said that today it will allow humanitarian aid into Gaza, where millions of people are essentially trapped without access to food, clean water, or electricity.
Protesters calling for a ceasefire in Gaza filled the rotunda in a congressional office building yesterday in our nation's capital.
The protesters were part of a march of hundreds of Jewish Americans and allies from the National Mall to the House Cannon office building.
Somehow, protesters were able to get into the building carrying flags and banners you see there on your screen. They were heard shouting chants like, "Let Gaza live." Some of those protesters were detained by Capitol Police, we're told. It's not clear what charges they could face, if any, though, at this time.
Meanwhile, tonight, President Joe Biden is expected to address the nation from the Oval Office just one day after traveling to Israel in a show of support for the Jewish state following that deadly Hamas attack.
He's expected to discuss the U.S. response to the attack as well as Russia's war in Ukraine. CBS News correspondent Ian Lee bringing us the latest this morning from Tel Aviv.
President Joe Biden returned to Washington overnight after his war zone visit to Israel.
I come to Israel with a single message. You're not alone. You are not alone.
While there, the president said his priority is the release of nearly 200 hostages being held by Hamas, and he pushed to get humanitarian aid to Gaza.
If you have an opportunity to alleviate the pain, you should do it, period. And if you don't, you're going to lose credibility worldwide.
Israel's prime minister announced the country will no longer prevent aid from entering into Gaza through Egypt.
President Biden's visit here yesterday came as tensions mount over a deadly hospital explosion in Gaza for which both sides blamed each other.
The president and U.S. officials are backing Israel's explanation that the blast, which killed hundreds, was caused by a misfired rocket launched by Palestinian militants. But the incident sparked outrage, with fresh protests in the Middle East and around the world, including in the U.S. Hundreds gathered on Capitol Hill yesterday to demand a ceasefire, with police estimating as many as 300 arrests. Federal law enforcement and intelligence agencies are now warning that fighting between Israel and Hamas has led to increased threats against Jewish and Muslim communities. Israel's aerial bombardment of Gaza continues, with troops amassed and standing by for an anticipated ground invasion. Ian Lee, CBS News, Tel Aviv.
The number of people killed on both sides from the fighting is now closing in on 5,000. That includes 31 Americans. The White House says recently that 13 Americans are missing in Israel, while the U.S. State Department is advising all Americans trapped in Gaza to make their way to the region's border with Egypt.
It is now 6:52. We want to get a check of our forecast on this Thursday morning as we're blowing the foghorn in some parts. Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning. Yeah, we've had some dense fog reported in places here this morning. Fargo was in that range, but we've seen some improvement, though still in the FM area there are places dealing with fog, and you can see that there's not a completely clear sky going on here as we're looking out to the east here in Fargo. So let's take a look at our visibility reports. There are places where we're doing just fine at 10 miles. Badette's been struggling a little bit, but we're up to 4 miles right now. Akandu still at 0, and that part of our northwestern viewing area seeing some reduced visibility increasing. Devil's Lake is less than 2 miles now, and we were doing okay earlier on. And then in the southern valley into Lakes Country, Monoman, Fergus Falls, Elbow Lake, down through Alexandria, all reporting quarter-mile visibility. So dense fog in that area. Fargo, we're at 5 miles, but at the airport in Moorhead, it's been lower. So again, it can vary even within a community. Here's a look at our current conditions on the radar and satellite map. We've got some areas where we have a few clouds passing by overhead, not the fog. And then in addition to that, there are some places where we have a little bit of rain detected on the radar. Some spotty, very light showers or some drizzle here. This is moving southeast, so it's more likely to impact our viewers north of Highway 2 in northwest Minnesota this morning, and that could continue into part of the day today. Here's a look at our current conditions. We are in the 40s. It's 43 in Fargo. It's 48 in Grand Forks. The wind is light and variable. Some of us even reporting calm weather going on today. And out at the bus stop this morning, we're looking at 40s to start. By the afternoon, getting into the 60s here, some low 60s. And then heading into the rest of the week and into the weekend, hopefully you can see these numbers here. We're talking about numbers in the 60s for highs through Sunday and even into Monday. Then we see the big changes for next week. Rain, cooler temperatures, and the possibility for some of that rain to mix over next week with the colder air. So just have that in the back of your mind as you are making your plans for the weekend.
Yeah, and of course, you can get a closer look at the 11-day with your free VNL weather app.
Always a great tool.
It sure is. Lisa, thank you. New this morning, a Farmington, Minnesota man is in the hospital with life-threatening injuries after his SUV crashed head-on with a semi in Dakota County.
The crash happened just before 10:30 last night on Highway 50 near Farmington. It's south of St. Paul. The SUV was traveling west when it crossed into the eastbound lanes, striking that semi. The driver of the semi not injured. New this morning, a 74-year-old Detroit Lakes, Minnesota man now hurt after a crash in west central Minnesota. This happened yesterday morning just west of Lowry in Pope County.
Authorities say 2 vehicles were driving along Highway 114 when they crashed. Neither driver was hurt, but a 74-year-old passenger from Detroit Lakes was taken to the hospital. However, he is expected to be okay.
Authorities say the road was wet at the time of that crash.
One of the 4 men charged in the death of a West Fargo teen is due back in court today. Fabian Scott is charged with murder and conspiracy to commit robbery in connection with a drug robbery that ended with 16-year-old James Moore dying from a gunshot wound.
Scott, along with 3 others, were arrested and charged for that shooting. Marcus McEwen, one of the other 3 men, was sentenced to 5 years in prison yesterday.
Now, originally, he was charged with murder, conspiracy. Days that he has already served.
Now, McEwen, Fabian Scott, Marcus Rexroad, and Tommy Trent were all arrested and charged for that shooting back in late May. The murder charge against Marcus Rexroad, though, was dropped last month as part of a plea deal, where he has now agreed to plead guilty to a federal charge. His sentencing now slated for December.
Tommy Trent was sentenced to just under a year of supervised probation. In addition to the charges that he is in for court today, Scott is now also charged with the murder of another teen for a case out of Minneapolis. It's been 2 years since the disappearance of Nevaeh Kingbird in Bemidji, Minnesota. Police say they have had tips, but no answers. Her sister, LaKaylee Kingbird, says she lost her best friend.
The 18-year-old is now in college studying law enforcement. She says her goal is to work at the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives Office in St. Paul.
The way her investigation was handled, the way her case is still being handled. I just want to spread awareness for not just my sister, but everybody else that didn't get any, attention.
LaKaylee says that she tells everybody to never give up hope and to try to always keep and find that hope alive. The Fargo Police Department asking for your help this morning in finding the person or possibly persons responsible for intentionally setting a series of late-night garage fires. It happened along 42nd Street South.
5 fires were set between June 27th and September 30th. Now, we have a map of the rough areas where this all happened. If you have any information about the fires or the people who did it, you need to call the Fargo Police. That number is at the bottom of your screen right now.
Funeral arrangements have now been set for the 20-year-old woman who was killed in a hit-and-run crash last week.
She's Bailey Bernstein. She died from her injuries in that crash on Sunday. Her obituary says visitation is set for tomorrow from 5 to 7 in the evening at Bethel Lutheran Church in Wahpeton. A prayer service will follow.
Her memorial service will be at 1 in the afternoon on Saturday, also at Bethel Lutheran. Visitation will be going on before the service at 11:30 a.m. Bailey's family says in her 20 short years, she made a permanent and loving impact on so many people she knew. There's also been a GoFundMe set up for Bailey's family. So far, they've raised over $10,000 since it opened earlier this week.
Now, the money raised will help cover funeral, medical, and other expenses the tragedy caused. You can find a link to donate on this story on your free VNL News app.
Happening today, Minnesota Youth Deer Season returns statewide. The season will be running from today through Sunday, October 22nd.
To participate, a minor has to be at least 10 years old and have a regular deer license. Now, children ages 10 to 13 need to be accompanied by a parent, an adult, or a guardian mentor of any type as well. Accompanying adults do not need to be licensed.
All hunters and mentors, though, regardless of whether they are participating in youth deer season, must be following that blaze orange and pink clothing requirement. More details are available on the Minnesota DNR Youth Deer Season webpage.
In honor of the National Toy Hall of Fame's 25th anniversary, the Strong Museum will be inducting 4 toys this year. 3 of them will be chosen as usual with the guidance of the National Selection Advisory Committee. However, a special 4th inductee will be chosen by you, the people.
5 multi-time finalists who have failed to make the cut in previous years, known as the Forgotten 5, are also up for a vote. On the ballot, Transformers, the Pogo Stick, Pez, My Little Pony, and Fisher-Price's Corn Popper. The final inductees will be revealed on Friday, November 10th.
The last time I did a pogo stick, I nearly broke my femur.
We need video.
Thankfully, it was as a child before everyone had cell phones to take video of.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll follow that story as it happens. The Today Show at CBS Mornings are just about to start, but the Valley Today rolls on.
Thank you all so much for waking up and joining us on your Thursday morning. Take care. I'm Ashlyn Hill.
And I'm Jordan Schreier.